okviru mreže za prostor, ki povezuje nevladne organizacije na področju urejanja prostora. In mreža je tudi organizator današnjega predavanja Jensa Brandta iz Copenhagna. Jens je urbanist, kot je nekako rekel sam arhitekt in urbanist, ki pa ne riše načrtov in se tudi izogiba planiranju. Kljub temu pa že več kot 15 let zdaj pravzaprav dela na polju urbanega razvoja, predvsem z velika pač pobud od spodaj in navzgor. Bil je tudi, kot je rekel, civil servant, se pravi, ampak zdaj pa že pač več kot 15 let samostojen in sodeluje z različnimi akterji v Copenhagnu. Sicer pa tudi živi in dela v Zagrebu. Tako da nekateri ste ga imeli 14 dni nazaj priložnost že enkrat slišati v Mariboru, v okviru Urban Hackathona. Za ostale pa evo danes to predavanje in jutri še na delavnice, ki je pa samo za člane mreže za prostor, kjer bomo pa malo bolj poglobljeno se ukvarjali z vprašanji kako dela z lokalnimi prebivalci oziroma z približevanjem urbanizma ljudem na nek način. Če malo grdo rečeno. Kakorkoli, Jens se bo še predstavil malo bolj sam, tako da please, Jens, the floor is yours and welcome in Ljubljana. It's your first time in Ljubljana, as far as I understand.
Almost. I had a wonderful introduction a couple of weeks ago by my friend Lars, so I almost know everything about Ljubljana, except where to go out within fields, but I think we will manage that today. Okay, but I'm very happy to be here. I'm also very happy to be invited. Yeah, I'm going to talk about something I call urbanize it. Just briefly, I try to define what urbanize it is, that it's more city. It's not city renewal or renaissance or revitalization, it's more city. It's urban capacity building and strengthening urban culture and developing tools and spaces and to set free possibilities and more openness to change. I will get much more back to that. Okay, Marco just introduced me, but just to make it a little bit more concrete, I'm trained as an architect, so I have been working with plans like that. Almost won the competition for the City Hall Square in Copenhagen. The honorable second place. And I've been working with visual arts and theater. And in this case, I curated this American artist, Andrea Citel, as a part of some sort of urban development. This is a floating artificial island where you can actually live. There's a little apartment inside. And it was floating between Helsingør and Helsingborg in Sweden. And yeah, that's when I worked as a civil servant. I was doing quite mainstream planning. This is the castle of Hamlet, and this is the harbor development plan for that. But what is more relevant to this is for a period of 10 years, I worked with a group called Supertanker, and the name is both referring to that we were working with the city of the harbor of Copenhagen, but also in Danish it's called Super Thoughts, so it was a very humble name. Very much about discussing in a more constructive and creative way, as opposed to mainstream planning. Just to give you an idea, we did many things. One of the last things we did in the municipality of Copenhagen was actually at the City Hall discussing the strategy for high-rise buildings in Copenhagen. And then we never came back to the municipality of Copenhagen anymore. They simply wanted to decide everything ahead of what we were going to say. So What I'm going to talk about more is what we work with in the suburbs of Copenhagen, working in first a social housing area, and it was much more this hands-on working with, in this case, kids, but so one could say that we went from having a dialogue to having a spatialized dialogue, making everything much more concrete. So, from that we kind of learned that, or what I've worked with, let's say, is something I call urban space. It's the social interaction and the physical space. That's sometimes hard for architects to work with. But I worked with a Lefebvrean geographer for 10 years, and I might have learned it by now. That space is something that we produce all the time. And also that the city is complex and collective and constantly changing, like a piece of art, but collective and changing all the time. Okay, so that's enough for introduction. So what is wrong? Let's go to Oslo. I don't know if you've been to Oslo, but this is quite a central part of the town, close to the train station. What they tried here was completely to separate walking and car traffic. So all the walking was supposed to be up in 11 meters, elevated walkways and bridges and everything. I mean, the classic modernistic way of separating everything. And then it's a very strange place. You really feel that you're from another planet when you're there. So I kind of looked at some old maps. This is the same place, but before they did this traffic regulation. And then this is what they did now. They are tearing everything down again. But what struck me was this one. If you see, it's not a straight line. It's, if you see it, this river, it actually follows the river for some really strange reason. There might be some rational explanation for that, but at least I thought that this was like, okay, we will follow the river, just like some weird, strange idea, you know. And I kind of thought that this kind of controlling or mastering nature, somehow, apart from all the other kind of interests and powers that pushing urban development, there is this wish for control. And is that? Can you see that picture? Yeah. Okay, I can't see it, but it's in New York City, and it's Robert Moses, one of the urban planners in New York City. If he wasn't there, we would never have had Jane Jacobs, for example. She was fighting him all the time, and he was doing this. He was like taking the fabric of New York City and just plowing through these huge infrastructures. I'm not going into details with that, but I'm just going to use that as an image for this urge to control nature or control whatever it is. In Denmark, we had a war against the Germans, and it's 150 years ago now, and it's been celebrated a lot. And because we lost some of the southern parts of Denmark, there was this motto, and it was a very naturalistic one actually. What is lost to the outside should be gained to or should be won inwards. And the French situationists and Lefebvre, they always talk about this neo-colonial way of that they had the colonies like France, and when they lost Algeria, they actually turned that colonial way of deciding what should happen in the territory inwards. But Denmark did this long time ago, 100 years before. So what is this picture? It's this kind of low marshland that they wanted to drain for a long time. They already made small canals, but then they made this huge canal. And that was this motto. That was the big company who had this motto, what's lost to the outwards and so on. So they built this canal, and quite soon this happened. Because what they didn't understand, there was a lot of problems with this canal. One thing was that some level of ochre in this land that was drained came in out to the water and simply killed the fish. So it was obvious and pretty fast. This was not a good idea. And quite fast, 19 years after, and the same amount of money that they paid to build the canal, they actually, you can see, they recreated the old one. And it seems like it's actually working. It's not that old, but yeah. But an enormous amount of effort and money went into that. So, and I think it's interesting that slowly people realized that, for example, when you build big roads or other kinds of infrastructure, that you have to build these fauna passage, I don't know if that's the English name for it, to avoid this fragmentation of nature. And when you read about it in describing these effects of fragmentation, it's simply that the animals start to die, just like the fish, but maybe a little bit slower. So that's why they built these bridges for animals, and maybe a little bit for the human beings too. So what can be kind of concluded is that this kind of canals and other things are based on not knowing how to deal with complex and fragile systems or balances, and this urge to control nature. Get further into that. But I'm asking, is that just the nature, or do we have some sort of urban version of global warming? Yeah, let's talk about the climate. Okay, because where I work, I just showed you the last picture where we worked in the social housing. This fragmentation is there at big time. It's totally split up by infrastructure. So there's absolutely no difference from the animals, except that they didn't build these passages for animals. And when you look at the social and functional fragmentation, it's completely similar. This little red mark is one of these social housing, generally cut off from everything else, stigmatized, socially completely different from the rest of this local community. And actually quite an interesting and fun place at the same time. So, but just to be a little bit dramatic, they also kill each other there. And it's not only because of this fragmentation, but definitely it's part of it. So when I started looking into what's the problem, very shortly, we can talk about this neo-colonialism. I mean, these people who go out to these social housings, they are almost like people who go to Africa and do good projects with the locals, but they have no idea what kind of power they represent. We will talk about participation later on, but it's part of this lack of reflection of the powers involved. And then, of course, a failure of democracy, that the way democracy works is not inclusive, especially for young boys in these areas. And then, in the end, I mean, too much spectacle, too many consultants, and too much cultural planning, and too many vested interests, money, political power, and so on. So, what I'm trying to say is that we have to make it more democratic, more dynamic, and again, simply more city. Sorry. A little break. I will have to make this a little experiment. Those of you with glasses, you have to take them up, and you have to get up from your chairs. All of you. Yeah, it's like in the church. Right. Okay. And then I want you to take your two hands. Can you see it behind? And you put just make little like binoculars, and then we walk around a little bit. You can just see what happens. Especially if you walk through the. You have to walk through the. Yeah. have to at least cross the room. Probably you know what this is called. It's a disease called tunnel vision. That if you, some people, they don't have the peripheral vision, and they actually see the world like that. And it's because what we think we see is actually a lot of dots where our focused sight actually focuses, and then it's stitched together in our brains. But what is interesting is that the unfocused sight, the peripheral sight, is necessary for this focused sight to navigate, to find out where to go and look. And I'm using this little experiment to just talk about this tunnel vision, because what is interesting and what is maybe the problem with this way of we do cities in general is that it's similar to this tunnel vision. It lacks orientation, it's very focused, but it also separates what it sees because it's this kind of focus, and it doesn't perceive movement. Movement is perceived by the peripheral, by the unfocused way of looking. So I'll get back to that, but this is just another example of the same thing, Heisenberg and this principle of uncertainty, that you cannot at the same time fix the position of a particle and the momentum, the movement of the particle. So there is an interesting thing about movement and fixing things. So, and this presentation was made in Maribor, and for some reason they talked about Detroit up there. I don't know why. Must be the beautiful river. Yeah. Okay, but Detroit is interesting because it's, of course, the car manufacturing capital of the world, or it used to be. And somehow it's maybe this modern city as an extreme, that it's pushing everything out to the suburbs, all the big factories, all is going away from this kind of more central kind of city. And of course it starts to rot, and we know the story about Detroit. But it's interesting to see some of the things that there was kind of pushed in Detroit. And I love this quote from Henry Ford, that you can get any color as long as it's black. Yeah. So it's this mass production. There's no space for appropriation. There's actually also no space for change. So this kind of Detroit story is also how you can be very powerful, but only in one direction, and if that direction is wrong, it goes very wrong. So it's maybe very rational and focused, but it's not open to change. And somebody who liked cars very much, Le Corbusier, he was fascinated by this mass production and the precision of houses that he could make with this mass production. He always had this big car, very fast car, in front of houses, if you see pictures of him and his buildings. The problem with that is that he took, there is this, and I think it's Adolf Loos, that he said that you should design everything as an architect from the spoon to the city. And that's, I think, where it really goes wrong, because maybe this efficiency would be okay in small scale, but when Corbusier starts to do this, a very simple principle, but just repeat it into, craziness, it's supposed to go wrong. There's something missing there. And I think this also is this standard domino module also to be produced in a big series. And it's again this mass production, repetition, no appropriation, except if you live in Bordeaux. I don't know if you know this building. It's also the Corbusier, and it's of course originally it was this repetition and white everything. And here apparently people did what they actually liked, and so this is what I call kind of appropriation. And if you block that, something is missing, and you like the change. And to some degree, I mean, we all learned that Le Corbusier was wrong, but somehow there's still some of these mistakes that are going on. And that's why I think that when you criticize somebody like Le Corbusier, it's maybe more some deeper going rationality, this fixed eyesight that might be still there. Because my argument is that we still repeat the same mistakes as with the Corbusier, just in a different way. And at least this is a Danish integrated urban renewal in Copenhagen. It's called the Climate Quarter in Copenhagen. Some of you know it. For me, it ticks off all the boxes in bullshit bingo, if you know that thing. But this illustration is done by some very talented architects in Denmark. And it's very popular. It's used in a lot of publications, and in this case in a newspaper article about this place. And on the online version of this article, where this illustration was used, there was quite an interesting discussion, all the comments. And one of them called it a postcard from North Korea. And I have another quote here that it's this... it's a quest for harmony, and it's the opposite of the city, the mix and the chaos of the city. And then later on, he's like, it's only for the nice, young, middle-class, average residents. So in a way, these kind of illustrations look innocent, but they are not very innocent. They are actually quite aggressive in the sense that they are pushing for an agenda for a certain kind of people, at least according to that quote. So, sorry. Yeah, the Danish planning. The question is if it's participation or if it's something else. Because in Denmark, participation has been part of the law for the last 20, 30 years. And it's my argue that they know to the last detail how to manipulate people to get what they want. I also know for a more of an anecdotal story about this climate quarter that some students and their teachers from School of Architecture in Sheffield visited them. And inside this maybe a little bit closed professional forum, architects talking to other architects, they were like, yeah, the architects should be back up on the top of the pyramid. It was this participation is just a game, and they do it very well. So, and even this repressive tolerance is not something I made up. It's actually a quote from the former city architect in Copenhagen. We invited him when we had these discussions about the harbor in Copenhagen, and he was like, yeah, it's great, I enjoy being here, but what we're doing is basically repressive tolerance. We can talk, but we will do whatever we want to do anyway. Which is actually not true, because that particular place, I don't have any photos of that, in the very central part of Copenhagen harbor, ended up being the biggest petition against a project by some Erik van, some Dutch name, I forgot. That's also, but the biggest protest against it. So they actually killed the project. But we also got actually blacklisted because of that, even though we were actually interested in making a more constructive discussion, not this black and white, yes and no. But anyway, yeah. And another quote from maybe Henry Ford was, and I heard it several times now, just the last couple of years, that if Henry Ford had asked what kind of vehicle they wanted. They wouldn't have pointed at a car, but faster horses. And so that's also an self-understood argument that it doesn't pay to ask people anyway. We know what we should give them. Actually, it's not Henry Ford. So my argument is that we still actually produce something we can call the suburban city. It's segregated, it's lacking this intensity that we all wish for. But I found some examples of how these wishes for something urban is still kind of to be seen. And one of my favorite spots in Croatia is this Westgate. Absolutely crazy. It's 10 kilometers outside of Zagreb, and still it functions as a, and they call it Westgate. I mean, it's referring to something which is, the old kind of medieval city, the gates of the city. And then it struck me that all the shopping centers in that part of Zagreb has something that refers to cities. City center, Pink Cross, arena, apart from the physical layout, which is, I think, a copy of the medieval part of Vienna originally.
This is the copy of VTC Ljubljana.
Yeah, okay. But the original shopping center in the US was done by refugees from Austria who hated cars. So he wanted to create this car-free environment. But another, maybe more interesting thing, and of course these kind of places are driven by profit and nothing else. That's just it. But they do, they know that people have a soft spot for this kind of coziness and referring to urban stuff. But more interesting is this, it's the headquarters of Pixar. Maybe you know these cartoons. And it's also maybe a little bit interesting because this is actually designed, or in principle, by Steve Jobs, mostly known for Apple. But what he said was that he wanted everything under one roof. I mean, again, this centrality or intensity. And the main objective was unplanned collaboration. And for me, perfectly urbanized. So this main space here was meant to be, we could sit and eat at normal days, but it could also be this kind of gatherings where you would have some fun experiments or whatever. What's also interesting about this Pixar building that they used to be in a very cheap place where they could just knock down walls and build and do whatever they wanted. And that principle they actually kept in the new building. So this is an office. And people can just do whatever they want to kind of, let's say, decorate or appropriate their own space. So in that sense, it's also this kind of spatialized dialogue. Again, kind of urban, but in this case, it's of course in the interest of making better movies and making more money in the end. But so back to this tunnel vision. So if we say that if we lack orientation, it's separating stuff, it's fixing stuff. For me, it's almost the perfect description of what's wrong with this suburban, rational, modernistic way of making cities. And I guess it makes it makes it also quite simple to see, okay, so we need to work with complexity, with dialogue, and change. So, Urbanize, it has 3 elements, and I will go through them. And there are 3. First, it's about the complexity, to keep it complex, spatialized dialogue, and change non-stop. So we have to, in general, go through these 3 stages. And one could say that you have to go from the focused side to the peripheral side. It's not, you cannot avoid to have the focused side, but you cannot stay there either. That's maybe the problem. And I try to illustrate it with the silos over there, the focused one, and the dots, which is the unfocused one. And so my suggestion is that it goes back and forth from the focused to the unfocused. So that's the general process between complexity, dialogue, and change. So first, keep it complex. There's this quote by Jens Brandt, and he says that it's not about invention, maybe that's the opposite of Henry IV, but it's actually that you have to pay hypnotic attention to the real. And then things start to unfold, and possibilities you otherwise wouldn't see becomes reveal itself. And one example of that is this story. Katie Payne, she was a researcher in elephants, and she went to the zoo one day to look at the elephants, and suddenly she felt some sort of vibration. Couldn't hear it, but she felt the vibrations in her body. And then she went back to the lab and got the microphones. And with the microphone, she could actually record this extremely low frequencies, which is the illustration here. And so I like the story because, of course, we need technology, but it was this presence and body sensation that actually gave this discovery of the elephant language. And something similar to, I will argue, is the case in the city, that you have to be there, you have to really physically take it to the streets, and then you can, because as our bodies is probably the most complex sensor that we still have, maybe ever. There's a lot of talk about smart cities and all the technology, and I like technology, but I think still that the complexity that we can actually sense with our bodies, all the social stuff, all the smells, the sounds, the vibrations, apart from the vision, is still unmatched. Okay, so keep it complex. When you come out in some, let's say, to a public meeting, if you do nothing, it's all the same, the usual suspects who will start talking. Those who are able to talk, or who like to talk, or who cannot stop themselves. So the usual suspects. That's always the problem in participation, that and they love to listen to themselves. And to keep it complex, you need to do something to break that pattern. You have to dig deeper in, get out to the streets, listen to people, feel the place, and then you can suddenly, like the Jules Verne quote, you unlock, or the possibilities will start revealing themselves. I will now give a couple of examples of projects I've done, and if you saw the illustrations of functional and social and spatial fragmentation, that's the place. It's this small suburban town with large social housing and lots of roads that's cutting through the place. And in this picture, it's a street kitchen, it's a bike kitchen, so we could go to places and make coffee or food and kind of start talking to people. And this is one of the most important places in that little community. It's the supermarket and the parking lot in front of it, which was an excellent place to talk to people. You would think that people are very busy when they go shopping, but by being there the whole day and talking to people, you could tell that they actually calculate time to talk to people when they're there. So we had no problem getting like interviews, 20, 30 minutes with people, and very important people. And one of the quotes was that they talk to each other across the refrigerators, or where the meat is. So, and that's the thing, you get out there and something magic happens, I would say. This guy in front of his house, it turned out that he was a beekeeper on his way out to his bees. And like this, we would get all the stories. We would also be able to get a good first impression. And we could at the same time inform people about what was the next thing, a public meeting or a walk or whatever. So this going around and talking to people had more than just this one effect, like listening to people. And then we would do some one-to-one mapping. We would write down some of the things people would talk about. we would put it up and do a little bit of changing that particular spot, but also make it so that people would see what other people had said and they would react to it. A little bit similar is this, where we actually have a map, so it's not one-to-one, but it was this map put up at a market day and still in the same little community. And similar principle that when people say something, we make stickers with keywords and put it on the map immediately. So we document what has been said, and people would start reacting to what other people have been saying. So in that sense, it's the map, but it's very dynamic because maps have the problem of fixing stuff. So doing mapping for me is extremely important to have this open, dynamic, flexible maps. Here you can see it a little bit. I also work with a digital map. It's based on Twitter, and so it's very simple. You can do a geotagged tweet out on the road, on the street, and it will turn up on this map. When you zoom in and out, you would actually get, if you go back, if you're zoomed out, you will get bigger text is indicating the words that are repeated most times. So it's a very simple statistic way of showing what is maybe the most common thing that people talk about. But then again, when you zoom in, it starts to get more and more nuanced and complicated. And then you can combine it with the links also going to Twitter, and we are still working on it, but it's this, keeping it open also when we do mapping. So what I'm trying to work with in this keep it complex part is to develop some sort of sense of city. We have sense of place, which is maybe more physical or spatial, but sense of city has that plus all the dreams and needs and interests. So it's not DNA, but DNI, and it's maybe the most important part of the city. Yeah. And with these maps, we can start to find patterns of possibilities. I'll show you in one of the next pictures. Yeah. So keep it complex. And we can't get away from it. Lefebvre is one of the big inspiration points. And when we talk about spatialized dialogue, it's this quote from Lefebvre that urban life is about meetings, but it's also about differences, it's about conflicts, it's about acknowledging people have a different view on things. Probably what we can use with this map is very much that the same place can be seen in completely different ways by different people. So that's also what the map is showing. So about the dialogue, if we again take the typical situation, it's that people are different and they stick to what they think. And typically the conflict can be even better, or let's say worse, because one person is very powerful, the civil servant or whoever can decide, and the small one, the citizen, feel that they are powerless. And then it doesn't really matter what they talk about because the asymmetric power relation is feeding the conflict. Anyway, so we need to put this unevenness, have to change that. And I don't know if this illustration is saying that, but let's just see. So you can see the map is still there, and what we can do now is that we have all these different statements about this, especially it's the center of this small town. I use sometimes very simple ways of getting some sort of agenda that they put blue dots or whatever dots to indicate what they think is most important. And very fast we can decide where and what is most important. And of course this walking and looking at important places, I would usually do these walk and talks by inviting some people who know about it, but also making sure that the participants also know something, so that it becomes this kind of collective storytelling. But most important is that, I'll go a little bit in depth with this one, we found out that there was an old garden at some site where they used to have a huge factory, which was really the heart of this community, and which was torn down, demolished. And this was almost a traumatic experience. But we managed to get this whole area opened up, and we started to work with this garden. And you can see we bought a lot of wood, and then I hired some kids, mostly from this social housing area, so that people could come. There was 2 weeks of open garden, and they would come with ideas. For example, one would have an idea to a bench, and then we would quite fast make a bench. So it was this making it very short distance between wishes and action. And you can see that's the building team. They were actually really good builders. 2 of them are from Bosnia, and they said that the Bosnian DNA, they have the building in their DNA. So we would invite people, and they would ask this building team to do stuff like a swing or a hammock or simple stuff, but still it would be almost symbolic because we were reappropriating an almost sacred place for that small community. He's building you see the yellow drill machine or screwing machine. He went home to get it from his parents because it was simply too slow to wait for the other things. So this building with kids is a very good experience, you see. And then, of course, in the end, we would invite for a public meeting, not so much talking about what could be nice to do, but actually who would do what. And you can see that we built all the benches, so it was very much keeping everything to that particular spot. And we would make groups that would do action, and that actually happened. I mean, it wasn't just talking afterwards. But what is maybe more important is that I asked the building team, so would they be part of this discussion? And they were like, no way. But they would keep building, so building was part of their statement. So that's why I talk about spatialized dialogue, that you can actually express yourself in different ways. And this classic kind of participatory public meeting is actually not very inclusive in that sense. Yeah. So from participation to self-organization, I think part of this dialogue could also be to, in a way, have this capacity building, teaching people how to organize stuff. Actually, if we refer to Lefebvre, he said, yeah, we talked a lot about participation, and he was writing about some project for New Belgrade, and he said, yeah, but you have self-organization, why do you talk about participation? So capacity building, local entrepreneurship, I mean, in my opinion, it could be a private, it could be a social enterprise. Both things are actually important for a local community. And also, if we talk about communication and dialogue, I think in some of these small places, they always had a newspaper before, but that's gone. So not only have we lack of a meeting point at a physical place in these kind of places, but we also lack the media part. We lack that communication. So what we also work with, but I don't show, is that we try to produce a little newspaper, local newspaper. But actually see public space as a public service like BBC or cinema media outlets, that it's really a democratic element like any other. One of the challenges in this is not only this neo-colonial risk that you go out and you tell the people what to do, but also that you have to balance between what you can call action and reaction. That you want to do good and catalytic, you can say, but the problem, and maybe especially for architects or people like men of action, that they jump to solutions, that they don't really reflect, they don't look at stuff like Jan was talking about. They actually already has the solution before they know the problem. And the other way is the reaction, the facilitation, that you let things come to you and then you start facilitating. And that is maybe the danger of the fellow, that you can get lost in reflection, that you can get that things get so complicated that you cannot act on it. So I think both things are important, but you have to balance and you have to do both. Slides. And about the last one of the three phases or methods, change. What is extremely important is not to fix things. Again, the way of looking. Bruno Latour has a funny text that's called "Give me a gun and I make all buildings move." And he talks about that the way we draw stuff is, this kind of, he talks about it being this Renaissance fixing, the construction of the perspective. And he says that we really lack drawings or, in general, something that can describe the movement. Not only the finished building. He talks mostly about buildings, but I think it goes even more, it's even more relevant when you talk about cities. It's even worse when you fix things in a city. So maybe the usual way, and I'm sorry about the graphics, it looks like the Bauhaus logo, but I'll work with that. But usually, when you do projects in the city, you need a result, building something or something very concrete. But I think it's important to go from only focusing on the fixed result to, let's say, some culture that leads to that result. Help to self-help or whatever you can call it. But a cultural change, not only a fixed result. And in this case, I used the same small suburb. Now people talked about what to do and who would do what at this meeting in the garden. And one of these ideas was to work with an old train station. So here we are inside that train station, and we started to do some quite practical stuff to make it function better. And we would build it on the spot and invite people in, and people would come with suggestions. Some people talked about the acoustics, and we would do some sort of improved acoustics. And we would build some wooden elements to both sit on and tables. And actually, I'm standing over there, and I'm handing out these little local newspapers. But what is important here is that at the same time we start to make people read and talk about how to organize this train station. So it's this combining the physical and the organizational. And you can see the boys are still there. Look at the body language of Mr. Armel over there to the left. They were not there for a long time. They couldn't really, they worked perfectly in the garden, but in that train station things were much nicer and too nice. So it didn't really work for them there. They really wanted a club or some place to do crazy stuff, and this place didn't work for that. That was quite clear. And then I just show you some pictures of what happened afterwards. So I kind of left the building, and this is the marketplace. It's right in front of the building, and this is a local demonstration against the local mayor. So it became kind of it started to get this kind of centrality or intensity by making it also a site for political struggle. But also just very simple stuff like putting up these public bookshelves so people can take a book and leave it again or keep it. And some paths around town. And a local theatre group actually started to make theatre in the train station. So it's just to show you at least that it succeeded to, on a very small scale, by not only fixing it in a physical sense, but also making it function by itself. So that's, of course, this organizational structures. Yeah. So urban capacity, but also urban culture. I guess you can talk about that. If there's too much CO2 in the air and climate change, I would argue that there's too little oxygen in this. It takes the dynamics out of urban development. So change, yeah. And then I have tried to work with putting them into some sort of a rhythm. So because when you do these things, you still have to get money. This is not free. So you still have to work with applying for money, doing success criteria, this kind of stuff. So I've tried to see if there was a way not to fix a project too early, because that's the classic problem in these cases. So trying to make a strategy in a tactical way. And this is a 3-year plan. So you do this kind of this circle between the mapping, the dialogue, and the action every year for 3 years. In the beginning, in the first year, you do both the mapping and the dialogue and the action, but you also develop the strategy as part of that. So you don't go out and talk to people and say, what do you think about this main street? You talk like that. You let people talk, so it's this kind of exploratory style, and then gradually you can see that there are these patterns that people are. They're actually talking about the main street, and then you can start to focus. Because the typical way of doing, for example, these surveys where you have a number of questions is that you have already limited what you get as a result, because you decided for people already. So you start out like that, first year. Second year is maybe more simple in the sense that you can do more, again you go out and talk to people, you start doing spatial experiments, you try to kind of document it, so on. And then the third year you do that again, but you also try to make sure that it will keep working after you're done. And by repeating it 3 times or more, you can do so that you make a baseline. The first year, you find out what's the problem, what should be the goal, and then the second year you go out and you talk to people again, and you can start looking at does it change the way you want it to, and in that sense you are able to document some of these soft things that you want to do, because you're always asked for success criteria. And mostly it's how many people came today. Okay, there are 30, 40 people here, but is it the right people? And that's the thing you always have when it involves money. Except if it's this rich person who just gives away money. But this is only a way of dealing with these kind of formal limitations that there can be for these kind of projects. So you also, by doing it, like in this case for 3 years, you can develop some sort of rhythm by repeating some of the things, or twisting it, not completely repeating it, but still create some sort of rhythm locally. And this is a way of working with this 3 elements. So the first part is to map the dreams, needs, and interests. That would usually be the first thing you do, but it's not that. The second part is to as a part of the dialogue, to discuss what's the main goal, what's the main problem, how would you solve that problem. This kind of logic argument. I'm not going to go into detail with that. And then you do the action. The important part of this is the upper part. that you get to a strategy and you put some indicators that can show the qualitative change that you're doing. Because usually when you get money for a project, you are asked to deliver in quantitative, how many people came. But that's the maybe least interesting part of doing these kind of things. The most important part is that people believe in themselves, that they know how to organize, or this kind of things. And that's only the qualitative indicators that can show you, and you can only get them by repeatedly go and ask people what do they think. And so that's the logic in doing it like this 3 times. I think this unplanned collaboration, So that's the end of it. Developing tools and spaces and setting free the possibilities of the city and creating more openness to change.